Hello, huddlers. I'm really excited to introduce you to Jenn Lim, who, among many other things, is the author of multiple bestsellers, including Beyond Happiness, the book. Here it is. The book we will be focusing on today. Yes, I did read it. Jenn is also the co founder of Delivering Happiness, the world's first culture consulting, that's coaching and consulting company. And she is one of the world's top 50 keynote speakers. Welcome, Jenn. How are you and where are you this fine day?
I'm doing great. I'm still impressed that you actually read the book. How many interviewers do that these days? I don't even know. I am in the Bay Area. I've been home based here since I moved to go to UC Berkeley. Vietnamese Go Bears out there.
Go
Yeah,
Bears.
so I am in the Bay.
Boy, I was about a day away from going to Berkeley. Yeah, it was really
Mm,
close. Then that
yeah.
little envelope came from Duke. So what can I tell you? Um,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
that's
But I'm
fighting
impressed
gloves
with
there.
anybody who can go to Berkeley because I really feel like you have to be someone who is knows what you want and goes gets it because
Huh.
it feels like you have to there's so much to sort through. It's so big.
There, it is a lot, yeah. Well, somehow I slipped through the knowing what I want because I had no idea what I wanted when I got in. I was a math major, and that was a mistake number one.
Oh my gosh.
Much
Oh well,
respect to that, but
interesting.
whew, yeah.
Interesting. So let's in the book you describe yourself as a happiness junkie. How exactly does that work?
Oh my gosh, that's what always amazes me when people read the book, the what they pull out of it, and I was like, "Did I say that?" I did say that, didn't I?
Yeah.
I get to I guess I get to say now I'm a recovering happiness junkie and I'm a recovering perfectionist. So I've been working on those things. And I think that's why, because the Beyond Happiness title actually did not come until the end of the book, until I finished most of it. And I was trying to, ladder it all up into what I was saying. So I think I'm a recovering junkie in the sense like when I originally came across science of happiness and positive psychology, and this was back in I would say 15, almost 20 years ago, when folks like make high chick, make how do I get his name right? Make high chick sent me high. I talked about flow, and the origins of positive psychology started coming out with Marty Seligman, all that. I was like, whoa, there's all this stuff, data, research, academics around this very subjective topic called happiness. And so that's when I became a junkie, uh, per se at the time, because I just thought, wow, I'm having all these existential questions that are already being answered in a way that's founded by data and science. So that's, yeah, that's when I was the major addict, but I've learned a lot since then. That
Yeah. So, and I know we're going to get to the science and the data, and it's really important to this conversation.
mhm,
But I want to I want to frame this because the subtitle of your book is How Authentic Leaders Prioritize Purpose and People for Growth and Impact. And
mhm.
no doubt the CMOs who are here with us and those listening later on share a mandate to drive growth and they want to have an impact. However, they may not be able to persuade their peers in the C suite that the best route is via purpose and
Mhm.
people, right? So let's just talk about the connection of purpose and people to growth and impact.
Yeah.
Nice, easy question.
Yeah. Way to start it off on the easy ones.
Yeah.
So what I think is what I think is most interesting about this whole idea of purpose, and I'll be the first to admit, like, it's been so used, almost over abused these days in terms of purpose, purpose, first, purpose. What is it for a company? What is it for people? In a way that has almost become a little bit devalued in how it's being used or how it's being applied. So even before COVID, I talk about BC AC terms. So before COVID is BC, AC is now. And even before, we would see studies like from Harvard Business Review and legitimate studies on companies that actually prioritize purpose that would show that they would consistently outperform things like S&P 500, those that double down on their people because through of purpose and values, etc. So that was already happening for those companies that did it well. And I say that as a caveat because there's a lot of companies that throw up a purpose statement and say, hey, we've got a purpose now, but they don't necessarily execute on it meaningfully. So companies like Airbnb, Patagonia, throughout from BC, and then during COVID, and then even now have proved that they can actually speak to their purpose statement and actually say, we're living it. And so the correlation gets higher. Since COVID happened, we've seen Great Place to Work release studies that show their people are 3 to 4 more times likely to stay. And the biggest hot button since COVID has been retention, retention, retention because of burnout, burnout, burnout. So that's what's been interesting to me. It's not just tied or correlated to profits or more productivity when purpose is in place. A lot of P alliteration here, excuse me, but it's actually tied to things that matter now, which is, why is burnout still the number one, according to Gallup, globally in the workplace, the number one thing that's plaguing us, and how do we address it? And I think when we talk about how, in the new terms, in the AC terms, purpose does come into place, because if we think about it, it's not just our people or our teams that are wondering about their purpose, it's us, us as leaders. And one thing that forcing function of what COVID and that whole last 3+ years did was, either we tried to learn something from it, or we tried to kind of, like sweep it under the rug. And so for those that have tried to learn some, gain some wisdom from such a turbulent, unknown time that we're still in now, it was a part of a reawakening, or you could say a re-enlightenment. If we think about all the historical times where people went back inward into themselves to understand, very simply, like, am I prioritizing my days right? And forcing function, a lot of people said no after everything hit. So I'd love this period to be a time where we can revisit not just our purpose, but also our values, and how we live them. And ultimately, why I was talking about not just what our happiness is, because it's beyond, like, in that sense of, this just not possible for us to wake up in the morning, go to sleep, and be happy throughout the day. That's just not within our means. But we can wake up in the morning, go to sleep, and know that we've lived a fulfilling day, because we've lived by what our purpose might be and what our values are, and prioritizing who we are and the people we love.
Okay, there was a lot to unpack there.
I
And I want,
know.
and so we will, so for listeners, we will get to this. The way I started thinking about it for this podcast was, there's the individual level, you all who are listening, you CMOs who are leaders, and how you can embrace this. Then there's this sort of, how do you bring it to your team? And then we might be able to get to, how do you bring it to your company, which I think is probably the toughest sell. Before we get there, two things. One, I completely agree with you that purpose became, thank you, Simon Sinek. I mean, it became something that everybody had. They wrote the statement. It was there, just like values. They'd go up on the wall, and then we'd go back to business as usual. So I completely agree that that is the reality of where a lot of purpose exercises go. But let's make this tangible, because I think it really helps.
Yeah.
Share example, because this is B2B group. So you did some work with a company in the construction industry or building or something. Talk a little bit about
Hmm.
that case and how it actually sort of helped transform a company in B2B in a pretty unsexy category.
Yeah. I'm trying to think which one you're referring to, because there was a couple. There was one in Egypt that was like a building real estate company, and there's also one in Kazakhstan, of all places, that was also a construction building company. Both of them did amazingly well, so I'm not sure which one you're
Either one is
interested
fine.
in.
Yeah, either
Okay.
one. They're both B2B, and I'm curious, or potentially B2B, and I'm just curious what kind of, give us a quick
Yeah.
review of sort of where they were, what they went through, and how they got there, and what
Yeah.
happened.
Well, what's interesting is that there was a lot of parallels between these companies. They are B2B in a very unsexy category or industry, known for certain things, not about happiness. But what I loved about them was, like, they, marketing, branding, decided, we build happiness, we experience happiness. So they're already splattering, all of their buildings with this, and they're like, wait, what does that actually mean? So what I loved about this is the difference with companies that actually engage us for the more, like, the deeper reasons, instead of being the next marketing campaign. And we know we've seen happiness all over the place, in what it can be for a company and a brand. But I think the difference here is that leaders are really intentional about, we want to understand the science of it. We want to understand positive psychology of it. So for both these companies, there was a huge fundamental shift and transformation in reshaping what their culture means. So it's really building from the basic fundamental blocks of defining and actually co-creating what their higher purpose means, what their values are, and specifically what behaviors like come under those values so that it's black and white. Because we all have seen values on the wall that just really just values on the wall and don't really mean anything. Like number one, value for Enron. I don't know if y'all remember that company from back in the day. Theirs, I believe, was integrity. So a bit of a values
Oops.
mismatch, yeah, in what it actually comes out to in real life. So with them, it was going to the basics, having actually everyone in the company feel like they're part of the process. It wasn't like a senior, offsite, senior management offsite. Hey, let's come up with these 10 values and we're going to live them now. It was a over a year and a half process of getting everyone to submit their own values, submit their own sense of purpose, and have a synthesis over this time to actually engage and launch them. And each of them did them in their own way. So because they're in building and construction, they actually rebuilt some of their headquarters so that each conference room would have a significance towards a specific value they had.
Mm.
So whether it be well-being or whether it be true to your weird self, which is like kind of how to say authentic, be, our authentic self. So they went, above and beyond to really instill them and embed them. But I think the biggest key in really making these things sustainable is how they also rewarded and recognized people when they lived their values. So it wasn't only when they were a rock star performer and killed their sales numbers or whatnot, or customer service, targets. It's that when they did that with their values in place and they showed how, and that's when they got called out in positive ways, whether it was just like a high five or recognized in their bonuses and pay and whatnot. So I think those were the biggest lessons learned. And in the end, they could really say we're living our purpose, we're living our values, because every single individual was as well.
And the aligning the values and compensation is something that's such an obvious but step that often is missed. And I'll give you the
Yeah.
classic example. You have a great salesperson who's hitting, 200% of quota, but is a complete jerk, and
Yeah.
everybody around them just like makes work horrible for them. But that same company has respect your peers or something like that as a value. And that
Mhm.
those two things are in contrast.
They
Uh,
are, yeah.
um,
And it comes down to the numbers if you think about it, because it's short-term gain when you keep that person, because like, well, of course we have to keep this rock star. Like it's going to be a bad example if we get rid of them. But at the end of the day, there is contagious stuff going on there. And it really is, that any kind of bad behaviors do sort of rub off on other people. So if you're thinking about long and short-term gain, then in the end of the day, you know that it's the right decision to make.
So we've set up this sort of beyond happiness construct a little bit, but I want to dive into how you get there, starting at the individual level, as in how the
Mhm.
marketing leaders here can sort of find their purpose and get through what is really a very challenging moment. And I shared a little bit with you. I mean, it is a crazy moment. You've got a Google apocalypse going on
Mhm.
where SEO is just crashing. You've got pressure on a short-termism it's probably the highest it's ever been.
Yeah,
And the result is, you know, everybody's focused on numbers and revenue. And sometimes you've got CEOs who are having daily calls. Let's talk about the revenue. And it's a pressure cooker moment. And yet,
totally.
and that's probably not where they want to be, but there are fewer CMO jobs out there right now. So it's easier said than done than just leaving. So let's just start with an
There's a lot to
individual
unpack on
level.
that one.
What's that?
Yes, there's a lot to unpack on that one too.
Yeah, well, I know. So, but let's get tangible for a moment and talk
Yeah.
about, because I know you write this, how do you how do you find your individual purpose, and just start there.
Yeah, so I think what all the things you said are, so true, and for better for worse, it's just not CMOs out there. It's like every role out there is being questioned in terms of what is the true value. And, whatever you want to believe from the hype of AI is is there, But I kind of remind everyone, remember when the internet was such this weird, anomaly and no one knew what to do with it? Like as a consultant, all we had to do was keep a page ahead of the client. Same thing here is what I'm feeling. Like, yeah, there's a lot of potential, but let's get real about now. And so what's been most interesting from BC to AC is that we as a company started talking about we got to start with the me. And never before has it been more important. Like, fun fact, Merriam-Webster's word of the year for 2023 was authentic. And that has been very much resonating more and more, like dialing up the volume. What does that even mean to be authentic? And that's really connected to where we say and why we say start with the me. So in that sense, like leaders as we are, if we're not walking the talk, it's just so that much more obvious and that much more apt to be called out on. And people are more and more willing to, speak with their feet and their actions and, the whole quiet quitting thing. I can name 10 more symptoms of all this stuff. So when we start with the me, is really digging deep into ourselves. And I don't take this lightly because it doesn't sound practical, but really this is where the practicality comes from. Because once we actually sense the difference in the value of our changes within ourselves, and then we can actually imagine how it's going to change for our team, most immediate team, and then therefore the teams that we connect with, and therefore the hopefully the organization at large. So the biggest thing since COVID was that number one, what we can do is attentive listening as leaders. And of course, we're naturally thinking, oh, we got to listen to our team, but I'm saying listen to ourselves. And one of the biggest things that also came out was this term that you all might be very familiar with, which is psychological safety. So psychological safety was something that Google did this really, and even before COVID, interesting study because they wanted to understand how to make the most effective teams. And so you would think it's like, the best technology, best manager, blah, blah, blah. But what they found, and it was a 3-year longitudinal study over 30,000 employees, it was psychological safety and how to make the most effective teams. And I know we're talking about the individual here, but I'm just going to like back up into that because that was really cool to understand how we can make effective teams. But I think if we zoom out, it's how we can make our most effective selves. If we can ask ourselves with psychological safety, am I okay? And actually mean that. And I know this is delving into mental health and well being, but what we're seeing is that until we can get a new norm of having these conversations, namely with ourselves, then we can't get real about what our purpose is, what are our values. Like it's just not going to be, correlated in a real, authentic way. So for leaders, I would suggest revisiting your purpose if you have one and revisiting your values. And that therefore leads to what it actually means to be fundamentally, sustainably beyond happy. So exercises we do, one is really simple. It's called light. So LIT. So what lights you up? L. And this is not just, what really makes you happy. It also really what fires you up inside. Like that's the energy that you want to kind of tap into, especially look, I don't know all your exact stories, but I know this for sure. Since I've been speaking since COVID, everyone has their highs and lows. Everyone has a bit of whatever you want to call, whether it's trauma or pain or loss, and not just of a human being. And I, talked to so many people of like a loss of hope, a loss of a friend that they thought they always had, a loss of a job, all these things. If we tap into those lows, that actually helps form our current state of what is actually most important. I'll give you an example of someone that revisited their purpose statement and said, oh, it's my family. Clearly, it's my family. And then we said, okay, let's take a look at how you're spending your time. And we call it the compass and the clock. So your compass is your family. How are you spending your time? And then by just that simple exercise, like, oh crap, like I'm not actually spending time with them at all. So it's then like, how do you realign it? And it's like, let's be real, you got to work still to provide for your family, but there's little adjustments. We're not talking about going from one level to the next level in one day. It's those micro adjustments that actually make a difference in how you prioritize your time, in how you have your conversations with your spouse or your family. That's the change that we're looking for when we start with the me. It's the small steps that lead to the big outcomes.
Small steps that lead to the big outcomes. Okay, so we're going to work on our individual purpose statement. And this quote I love. It says you'd be better off working on your eulogy than your resume. And
Yes.
then you use this acronym LOYLL, as in living out your living legacy. Can you
Yeah.
explain?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've met so many folks that have had a tremendous career, all those things that we wished for when we started out. And they come to a point where they look back and like, what was that for? And it's so, it's luckily for those people that actually realized it before it's too late, but there are those that don't. And it sounds so, cliche, but it has happened more and more. And I think especially since we were faced with a lot of tough decisions in the last few years. So I just kind of want to flip it to, yeah, of course we need to get a job and we want to have a sustainable career and make sure our loved ones are taken care of. But is that really the point of all this? And to put work in the proper place of prioritization in life. So it's not work life, it's actually life work of, work is is part of the equation of life. So that's when I went to the eulogy part because, like, for myself, I had a really dear friend pass away at the end of 2020, like 5 weeks before the book was due, which really rocked my world. And, he was in his 40s. And we all have those moments of people, you know, um, as an example for me, but I think we all have those moments. So if I mentioned him in the book, I mentioned Steve Jobs because he would have been known for a lot of different things at his eulogy, in his eulogy. And at the end of the day, his family talked about how amazing a person he was. I'm not sure everyone at Apple would say the same thing, but maybe he didn't care as much because he was a pretty creative guy. But all to say, it's just like such a important exercise to remind ourselves, like, what is it that we want people to say when that fateful day comes? And that for me helped me and the people that I've been working with prioritize their days, knowing that that work will always be there, but how people will perceive us when we're gone in making our legacy, not when it's too late, but as we live it today, not later.
For those who don't know, you were referring to Tony Hsieh, who was your business partner, who was the founder of Zappos, and
Mhm.
I figure I was going to ask you this later, but we're here now.
Yep.
Uh,
It's how we
so
flow with the
yeah, we're
conversation.
here. Talk a little bit about that specifically, because I think we all do have our own issues, but very few of us actually have what you had, which is this is a business partner who was very much part of, your business, your life, your inspiration. And I'm just curious, as you think about him and the book, and the process of the book, to me must have been a little cathartic for you, in
Yeah,
some ways.
it's cathartic, and it was, to be honest, hard AF. Like, it was one of the hardest things I had to do. Not because of his passing, only because there were so many. If you can imagine, I started writing this book at the beginning of 2020, and it was due at the end of it. And every other week, there was this headline that kind of blew our mind as to how the world was shifting. And then it culminated in his passing at the end of that year. And as I mentioned earlier, I had 5 weeks to turn in the manuscript. And it's only now I can start joking about it. But like I say, oh, I had a really forgiving publisher. Like, she gave me an extra day, but she actually gave me longer than that. She gave me extra weeks. So it was such what it turned out to be was a wake up call for me in saying, look, you're about to publish this book. Do you mean all the things that you say? Like, all this, like, almost 2 decades of learning and research and all this in the space of applying, so I call it positive psychology, to workplaces. Then my best bud co-founder dies. And it's like, are you sure you mean this? And it was a reckoning moment of, like, asking myself, and truth be told, it meant more than ever because of those highs and lows that I talked about, and being able to not sweep them under the rug, and being able to sit with them. And I lost my dad 20 years prior. So understanding those lows really made me feel more than ever that how the uh, um, the priority of going beyond, which is why I ended up naming this book this. This is actually living in the highs and the lows. And that then therefore leads it to a fulfilling life. It's not going to be happy go lucky. It's not going to be like, rainbows and unicorns every day, but at least it's real. And then we're therefore more capable of doing all the other stuff we want in our workplace, in being a better mother, father, sister, brother, etc. So yeah, I sit with it every day. I mean, last Tuesday was his 50th. He would have been 50. And it was 3 years ago since he passed. So these things, and we all have our own stories of how death is the greatest reminder of how we can live, and obviously honor their legacies.
Thank you for that. I'm going to shift gears a little bit to, you have this quote, it's to future-proof ourselves as individuals, we need to see ourselves constantly learning and growing towards our most authentic selves. And
Mhm.
the future-proofing is really important part of what we talk about at CMO huddles a lot, both as the individual as a leader, but also sort of the team. So talk a little bit about this notion of future-proofing and how do we do that?
Yeah. So yeah, with future proofing, it's like when I wrote this book again, it was 2020. So AI didn't do its crazy thing that it did at the beginning of this year, where within a month it reached the same amount of people, if not almost double within 2 months of, like, how long it took the telephone to reach the same amount of people, which was, like, 70 something years of 50 million people. ChatGPT took 1.5 months. So it's just, like, a reminder how fast things are changing. So to future-proof ourselves is basically to not predict the future and know that it's going to outpredict anything that we can do or even try to fathom, because we knew that this day was coming. We knew AI was coming. We knew singularity was coming. We just didn't know it was going to come this fast. Same thing that with 2020, we knew climate change was happening. We knew there was going to be pandemic, global civil unrest, technology transformative exponentially, but we just didn't know it'll happen all one freaking year. So all the data points is here to show, like, okay, well, what can we do as an individual and human beings? And that's why when I talk about the future of work, I say the future of work is human, because the more we have these tools that are supposed to help us with, from the internet to the blockchain to now with AI, the more we need to dig deep into ourselves and what it is that we truly bring to the table, not in a cliche way, like, this is not a Mariah Carey song. This is more about, like, what's the hero in yourself? It's like, okay, I know I was born with certain things, what my talents are and what my like my core and my being and all that. By digging deeper into these things that we know as humans will be of value for as long as we're alive, and as long as we know that technology will be there, they'll need assistance. Technology needs our assistance still, at least for now. So future proofing really comes back down to how can we shore up what's most valuable within ourselves, and ideally, of course, align that with our sense of purpose. I think these days it's less of a nice to have, it's a need to have, in being able to bring to the table of us as, whether we're CXO or CMO, knowing that, as an example, I've hired a CFO that is taking on multiple jobs. Like, this is not, maybe not the ideal, the fractional CFO, but it makes sense because we're looking for, short-term changes, and at the same time, he has an eye for long-term gains. Um, Same thing with my CMO that just had a shift in her priorities too. So these things are not ideal because it's like, wait a second, what happened to that, sustainability or longevity of this job that I worked so hard for? Um, yeah, I'm questioning my own worth and value as a CEO. Like, what am I going to do with my own sense of future proofing my value? And that requires, unfortunately, a lot of hard shifts. And that's why I think that authenticity piece is so important, is by really being true to our highs and our lows, our strengths and our blind spots, and our shadows. That's, I think, when we can get to the core of how to make ourselves future proof, because at least it's true to who we are inside and what we really most want for ourselves and our loved ones.
So as we future proof ourselves as individuals, I'm thinking so there many of the examples that you have in your book are where the company or the country realized that they need to they want to pursue happiness, if you will. And
Yeah.
uh but I'm wondering sometimes I think this a CMO right now going to a board of directors or a CEO and say, hey, we really need to change our culture, improve our values, and become much more purpose driven and blah, blah,
Mm.
blah. And it might be a hard nut to sell, but they could, and I'm sort of get your take on this. They could take their team through the journey first
Mhm.
and sort of control what you can control, if you will. Does that make sense? I mean, in terms of following this process, if rather than just saying, let's just I'm gonna take a big run at this and try to get the
Yeah.
whole company to do it. What do you think?
I think it's absolutely the best way to test it. That's the best next step, especially right now where everyone is just reining everything in, like God bless CFOs, but like let's not have a conversation on this stuff right now of like the pocketbook. But if we carve ourselves a project for success, set us up for success, that's the way that I've seen it done, especially right now. Smaller, a more manageable group of people that already kind of get, what you're saying with how do you build this stronger culture by instilling and connecting and creating a sense of belonging, all these key words that we know that matters to increase engagement. Do it with a smaller group, embed it within, and then measure it. And that's when you get the CFOs and CEOs hearing like, "Oh, wait, you're actually more, like have a greater sense of engagement, have a bigger sense of fulfillment, and you're producing results." There's no good leader that would say, "Stop doing that." So that's absolutely the way to go. And if you think about it, it doesn't cost that much. This is more of those skills that they're soft, but they're hard. They're hard to implement. Um, and don't get me wrong, it's like, don't make it all fluffy either. It's like, at the end of the day, boundaries around this is super important. Like, you're not there to sit through 8 hours of how someone's day went wayward. It's more about these boundaries of listening attentively and then coming up with solutions to test, knowing you can't please everyone, but you can say, "We're gonna try and do this together," and iterate from there.
So part of this is that you use the term greenhouse conditions. Why are these important?
Mhm.
And maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then we'll go into some conditions, if you will.
Yeah, so the greenhouse metaphor came about actually a while ago. Tony and I used to talk about greenhouses as leaders. We as leaders want to create the conditions for others to grow. We don't have to be the tallest tree, the biggest plant. It's just how can we create those conditions? And I totally agreed with it. It's the way we ran like our teams for a long time. But when COVID hit, um, I realized we were missing a big piece, which was how do we as leaders nurture others while tending to our greenhouse too? So it's the same analogy as the oxygen mask, like in planes, but we forgot, maybe because we couldn't fly for 3 freaking years and, the whole thing was out the door. But now we can remember, and now we can actually put that in place. So the greenhouse conditions when it comes to teams is having a sense of accountability. So it's not big brother, big sister. It's like, I got your back, you got mine. What's in it for me? What's in it for all? Answering both those questions. It's alignment, having alignment of each individual's sense of purpose and values to that of the team, if not the organization. Having a sense of belonging, which is a huge one. I feel like it's been the trajectory of where we went with D&I to now it's belonging. How do you create a place where it truly nurtures the authenticity while respecting others? And the last thing is commitment. This is the long-term view and the long-term gain. It takes time to go through iterations of this, just like any forest going through a fire. Like, it takes time to rebuild, and we've gone through a lot of fires right now. But with that comes resilience, and I think with those things in place, that's if we want to face this unknown of the future of work and AI, that's kind of where the foundation comes from.
And those four words, I think the fact that you listed accountability first. I mean, first of all, what that does in the
Mm,
conversation, again, not rainbows and unicorns. We're talking about doing something and accomplishing something.
yeah,
Alignment that we all are sort of heading in this, or trying to grow the same plants, if you will. Uh,
totally.
Belonging, yeah, this is a team, and it's going to take a team. Gosh knows in marketing that is the way it is. And often, I sort of I'm thinking about this, and let me get the
Mhm.
last one because I have so many thoughts going at the same time. Commitment is that, yeah, you're accountable, but you're committed to both the individual and the group. I'm thinking about this now and wondering, okay, they get the marketing team on board, they have these conditions, and then migrating it to sales, their closest next partner would be, getting the
Mhm.
salespeople. And that'll be so interesting because salespeople are incentivized to sell
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
everything in that thing. And there's often a disconnect. And I think in some ways, it's harder than ever because you're not in the same room or the same building. Now you're the salesperson's over here. And, you know,
Yeah.
and so is that again, maybe the path here is not from the team to the organization, but from the
Mhm.
department to yet another department you work closely with.
Completely. And I call it people ecosystems in the book, but basically it's who is in your ecosystem of who you touch, connect with, do business with, transact with, etc. So I'll just give you an example that just within this last month, there's a company called The Agency, and they're a global real estate company with like basically agents, hence the agency. And their CEOs on, I don't know if you watch reality shows, but what's that show? It's the dancing one. Does anyone know what I'm talking about?
But
It's not So You Think You Could Dance, but it's like a anyway, it's
okay,
a competition with
Dancing with the
the
Stars,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah, yeah, that one. The
Okay,
CEO
good.
was on
Thank
there. It
you.
was random. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. So yeah, I did my talk about the things about accountability, and a team came up, and they're all, they're agents, so they're all salespeople. And then like we were already thinking of how this is not a zero-sum game. We're here to help each other. Some people are more seasoned, some people are not, but we realize that by being, working as a team, we can actually produce more and be more successful. But when I talked about accountability, they were like, that was the missing piece. Like, we knew this conceptually, but if we are accountable for each other, so specifically actually assigning accountability parties with partners for another person, that was the light bulb they needed in terms of like, that's how we're going to get through this. Because let's face it, for them as well, real estate industry is not looking great. It's for this whole next year is still looking crappy. So for them to have this glimmer of hope and anticipation, like, hey, we could actually weather through because we're going to work through it together. Um, that was just awesome to see. Like, there was a bigger sense of agency. And I think as leaders, if we remember, I think agency might not because I just worked with the company, but agency as our own agency, helping everyone in our teams remind themselves, you have the agency to make some difference in your own lives. And I'm here to help support as a manager or CMO or the leader. Like, because in the end of the day, we can all be our leaders if we want to make
Yeah,
the right
and
choices.
that I love the accountability partner notion, and we talk about that we have a transition team with a lot of folks, and finding another person who's also in the same place to do it. But even at the organization, the notion of having an accountability partner, where I'm wondering about is this
Mhm.
notion of team of teams, because now we could say, you know what, they're really, and a lot of we talk about this a lot, that the difference between marketing and sales these days, the common metrics presenting together with the head of sales. And so this team
Mm.
of teams kind of breaks down departments a little bit and creates
Yeah.
this flexible. We're going to talk a little bit about that idea.
Yeah. So team of teams, and what I love especially about this concept is it came from a someone in the military. And I want to say he's a sergeant. I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe he was a colonel, but his last name was McChrystal. Is McChrystal? He's still alive. So McChrystal sounds like straight out of a movie. Like Sergeant McChrystal's team of teams is working. So what he did, he's broke down the hierarchical structure of command and control. And what he did, and this was probably in the last decade, that he realized that it's not the command and control that works in a real life war setting. It's when you can create a flatter, not flat, period, but a flatter organization where teams are given the ability, if not agency, to be more mobile and flexible and who does what role. So that was, I mean, imagine doing this in a construct of the military, and he was able to test it in real life battle. Thank you, Stanley McChrystal, General. Thank you, JD.
Yeah.
JD, thank you.
Yeah, I remember he was actually JD, you can confirm, but I feel like it was either Iraq or Afghanistan and one of the leading generals
Yes,
in that. So
thank you for the reminder.
okay,
Yes.
so all right, team
So,
of
yeah,
teams.
team of teams. So being able to like do away with the old sense of what hierarchy, what like why hierarchical structures do not work as well is because we need to be more adaptive. And it doesn't mean like, like having everyone in your team, like go be your authentic selves and like, everyone's all running around doing their thing. It's like giving the flexibility of adaptation with boundaries, needing a sense of structure and rigor. Otherwise, it would be like everyone just kind of doing their own crazy, authentic thing. So that leads to a whole different mindset on how we can run our organizations from a different organizational design. I know this is very non-sexy talk, but that's what we're like getting into. Like we've tested a lot of different forms of that. And I think at the end of the day, it comes down to you knowing your team's best, but it is having more of that fluidity of who's doing what based on the goal at hand and that immediate time and having that sense of high adaptability should things change, and they are every day.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about it even within a marketing department. If you have 100 people and you have some people in demand and some people in brand and some people in PR and some people,
Yeah.
so over, there's often just a disconnect in a silo even in that. So let's talk about the 6 degrees of impact exercise. Can you sort of quickly describe how that works?
Yeah, I love how you read so much of the book. There's all these things like, oh my God, can't believe you remember that one too. So 60, this one's really, it's a visioning exercise, and it's actually really fun because it's practical too. It's not too moonshotty or out of the sky, pie in the sky thing. So essentially, and I'll give you an example. Actually, one of the construction companies did it and they succeeded. So 6 degrees, 6 pieces of paper, just imagine, however you do paper these days, virtually or not. And the beginning, the first paper is just where you are now, and the sixth one is where you want to go. And the 6 degrees comes from this whole notion of how even the big ideas can be reachable and achievable if you actually put the storyboard of how it might happen. And the way it works is to get the people involved in the team. And this essentially is connected the team of teams. Is like, who do you think can be part of this in all different roles? It doesn't just have to be marketing. This is actually a cool exercise to do with sales because it's cross-functional. It takes that kind of, um, all these different roles from different functions for it to work. So what this company did, it's called BI Group in Kazakhstan. They wanted to get on the cover of Fortune magazine local to their region. And so they mapped this all out with cross-functional teams and like, how are we going to get there? And it was, at first it was like, we're never going to get there as a pie in the sky. But eventually in a year and a half, they were actually, because it was more of this like fluid architecture of their teams, people know like the 6 degrees, like someone's bound to know someone somewhere. And so that's kind of how they could make those connections happen where they thought they couldn't. And lo and behold, they landed on the cover of Fortune magazine a year and a half later. So sounds too good to be true, but it's really cool to see like everyone taps into their resources and gets creative at the same time to make that
Yeah.
happen.
I'm just imagining sticky notes all over my wall, just doing that exercise, and I hope and I need more details later, but I'll go back to the book or ping you for it to be able to do it.
Yeah,
Okay, because we have
definitely.
a few more things we wanted. So there's another thing, purpose days, and that
Hmm.
idea was in the book, and I thought that would be another interesting thing about how could a CMO make the case for having these at their company.
Yeah, I think prior to that, like the step before that is actually addressing the whole topic of purpose, not just as a team, like what's the purpose of our team or what's the purpose of our company? Because sometimes we all know there could be a disconnect of what the values are for the company and therefore what are the values for the team sometimes do not match. So I would say before even thinking about purpose days is going through the exercises, and it's in the book. It's actually on my website as well, free, all downloads free, to guide them through. Look, we're not all about, live this purpose, therefore you're doing your job. It's like we want you to live your own purpose. And the first step in that is identifying them. So going through this process of helping each individual go through that exercise and get them back all together. And you'll be surprised by sharing your purpose exercises in a team, how many of those are so aligned or overlapping. And that in itself, when people see that, brings them closer together. Talk about a sense of more meaningful connection. It's no longer about, what's your favorite happy hour drink, or what are you binging on Netflix today? It's more like, oh, wow, that's your purpose. That's actually mine too. And this is how I do it. So it becomes an amazing exercise in a time people are looking for a sense of connection. So yeah, that's
Okay. So,
where I would start.
so JennLim.com is where we'll find those.
Yeah, jennlim.com.
Right. With Jen with 2 N's.
Yes.
Again, branding, very important. Differentiation.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks for remembering.
so basically this
Makes me listen.
process goes, get your individuals on your team aligned
Yeah.
on purpose, get the team aligned, maybe get a department or two aligned, and then ultimately, perhaps by showing the results, because you have measured it, you can go to the exec committee and say, hey, we can sort of do this on a grand scale, and then we can actually keep
And
going.
measure
Okay.
along the way. Because if
Okay.
whatever the hot metric is, be it retention, be it engagement, however, it's already being measured. Don't reinvent the wheel. Take that metric and measure it and show how it's dialing up.
What are happiness heartbeats?
I've already mentioned these in a different context, but it basically is the highs and lows. So essentially, another exercise that in that free download, have every individual go through their happiness heartbeats, highs and lows, in not just work, but life, general life. That's when I talk about my dad passing, I talk about Tony passing. And so in that exercise, it was a reminder how it's not the highs that we learn from, it's also the lows. And we start pulling out the consistent values out of it. So for me, since I started doing this, my values have been freedom, authenticity, and relationships. So it was so interesting for me to revisit that during COVID and see how that manifests today in those three words. And it's different. And a reminder, a purpose is ever evolving. So once you get one, it's not like, oh, that's me for the rest of my life. It's like that evolves as you evolve. So just a reminder of that as well. But highs and lows is a great way to identify values and then share them amongst your team. And again, you'll have more meaningful connections because you're understanding each other in a deeper way.
So there's a quote in the book which says, control and change what we can, embrace and adapt to what we can't. And I want to, with that quote in mind, talk about short-termism versus long-termism, and the fact that I don't imagine that any of the CMOs listening today are going to run into the office of their CEO and the board of directors and say, gosh darn it, we're missing the boat. We could have more impact and growth if we just went purpose-driven. They're just probably not going to do that. So how does how's this light bulb go off?
How does it go off or go on?
How does that, I mean, how did suddenly CEOs see it?
Well, in that scenario, I wouldn't recommend it either, because I don't want to get an email tomorrow saying, thanks a lot, Jen.
Thanks.
I lost my job. How does it go? So the biggest thing, and that's why it's like, the biggest thing is like when leaders see it for themselves. And for us as leaders, sometimes it's not being the mechanic because we can't fix everything, but we can be the mirror. So we're going back to that scenario of even if the CEO does not get it, it's okay though, because again, we can create and carve out something within our success of what will move the needle on the things that we want to change. So I would say with the CEOs and CFOs, keep on bringing it back to the metrics of what you're doing and how it's, affecting the bottom line, because sometimes you can't just persuade them, look, beyond these short-term gains, we have to think long-term. Just show it in what you do. And the biggest thing in this, if you do it, then no matter what they think, you're actually making making an impact within your own life. It's not about changing the world. It's about changing your world. And it makes it, something that seems so out of our hands, out of our control. And that's why I go back to that quote of the adaptive age. It's like control what we can, which is within and the people we touch, and embrace what we can't, which is a lot these days and more and more.
Love it. I'm going to sort of just so punctuation point on being the mirror, which is so much of it's a lot of what the CMOs do because they're the mirror to the customer.
Mm,
They're often the mirror to what employees think and what partners think. And then this is just so change your world. That's the thing that changed you can't change the world, but you can
mhm.
change your world. And that's such an empowering notion. And I thank you just for just sharing that and putting that so succinctly. Uh, I want to
Thank
go back,
you.
circle back real quick, and then we'll wrap up. But
Okay.
so the 6 degree exercise, I've got where we are, and I've got where we want to be. There's
Uh-huh.
4 degrees in the middle there. Is there specific things to sort of, is there a 6 steps that you go along, or is it just figure it out?
It's it's meant to be very collaborative.
Okay.
So it's not to make it like no, too much of a consulting non-answer. It all depends. It really is like because you have these heads and minds and hearts in the room, that's when the creativity comes in. It's like, and you just never know. Like the person that's like sometimes the most introverted one has like the best ideas, or like, oh, my aunt actually knows so and so, and like that's when things get really cool because then it's within reach.
Yeah. So, okay. Uh, you shared that, according to the Gallup poll, only 27% of employees strongly believe in their organizational values, and less than half even know what they are. Feels like
Yeah.
there's a lot of upside here.
Way to look at the glass half full.
Thank you. Thank you.
You need a t-shirt.
All right.
Yeah. There is a lot of upside. That's the thing. It's like after doing this work for so many years, like people are asked, like, why do you still see that there's because like there is something to be said of like um as much as it can be feel like this, like things are getting worse and more unpredictable and volatile, there's a lot of truth to that. But there's also something that we did not have just a generation or two ago, which is our parents, our ancestors actually succeeded in what they wanted to do, whether it was just basic freedom or not having to worry about food on the table. For the most part, of course, this is a generality. For the most part, we have the luxury of living the life that they wanted for us. So in some ways, I take that as a responsibility of fulfilling the sacrifice, sometimes life and death sacrifice of what they did in putting these things into place because that's what they were, did all this for. So why wouldn't we want to honor that, knowing there is a better way to live with our head in our hearts and grounded in who we are?
What a great place to sort of wrap up the conversation. First, Jenn Lim, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you,
I
Drew.
know I found it inspiring, and I hope everyone listening did. I want to sort of make sure that people understand. So there's jennlim.com, and what will we find there? And then let's talk about and just give us a sense of delivering happiness and
Sure.
your coach consultancy.
Yeah, so Jenn Lim is more it was launched with my book and now it's like my own individual sort of exec coaching and services that I do around that stemmed from the book. So I have this thing called the greenhouse method that's more specific on how we create greenhouse teams and create greenhouse individuals. And then Delivering Happiness was the company that started in 2010 after this same name of that book came out. So that was more for organizational change and design on a different level, but using positive psychology. And then now Beyond Happiness is more about the Gen Lim stuff of Greenhouse and where we are today.
Got it. Well, I appreciate you, and I appreciate folks, and it feels like that you got a lot going on. So thank you so much for joining us,
Don't we
Jenn.
all? Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I welcome any questions. This is what I'm here for. Thanks for letting me live a bit of my purpose as well. So
My
however I
our,
can
our
help.
pleasure. And any of you folks, you can also find Jenn on LinkedIn.